Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking learning, because at some point we all have to take a lesson or two on board, don't we? Like for example, 8 seasons is probably too many seasons. No one ever needs bat nipples, and don't ever get too attached to anything from your childhood because eventually Michael Bay will destroy it. And as we gear up for a new World of Warcraft expansion, it's a time of massive excitement among the player base, but also of trepidation, because I don't think I'm alone in my opinion that Legion was, overall, a pretty awesome expansion really. It got so much right, and although it wasn't perfect, it looks as though it'll take a well-deserved place in the upper echelons of fondly remembered WoW times, so you know, well done. And one of the most impressive things about the entire endeavour for me personally was how well Blizzard learned their lessons from Warlords of Draenor. Legion is such an improvement on its predecessor, and so specifically excelled in the exact areas that Warlords fell short, that the entire exercise felt like a vindication of sorts, a cleansing of the well, the kiss of life that WoW needed with just the tiniest hint of tongue, because why not? And with Battle for Azeroth getting closer every day, like seriously every day, it's time for Blizzard to learn a whole new set of lessons all over again. What worked in Legion? What ideas must be kept at all costs, and which need to be consigned to the Medan bin of we never mentioned thisness? Join us as we ask, what lessons must Blizzard learn for Battle for Azeroth, okay? Go, 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 go. You know, people are pretty down on Warlords of Draenor, and with good reason, but they forget that in the early days of that expansion, everybody loved it. A strong opening, no one had been forced to repeat multiple times on their alts yet, and a strong, story-driven leveling experience had people singing from the rooftops about what a wonderful work of genius it was. Unfortunately though, as we all know now, Warlords turned out to be the expansion equivalent of Morrissey, fooling you into falling in love with it in the early days with groundbreaking work, but then disappointing more and more the older it got. The problem with WoD, of course, was its lack of content at endgame, a suspiciously missing raid tier, a confusingly truncated story, a final raid that lasted longer than your average Britney Spears marriage, and a gameplay loop disappointingly based around garrison chores and not one, but 2 all-consuming mission tables. Hearteningly though, Blizzard totally learned from their mistakes on this one, because Legion was stuffed so full of content updates, appearing so regularly on the now famous 77-day patch cycle, that at one point people started complaining that there was too much to do, too much game to play, which if you're going to have any complaints, let's be honest, that's a pretty good complaint to have. And this content wasn't selfie cam patches either, they were all substantial, with new things to do, dungeons to run, areas to explore, or big, massive, ridiculous story to further. And when there weren't patches going live, Blizzard successfully kept player interest and hype simmering away with a continuous stream of PTR updates. As a result, it always felt as if there was something happening in Legion, something new to play or look forward to. And I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty great for creators too. Belialar had so much to be getting on with that not only did the Belfast murder rate drop to its lowest level in 23 years, but he eventually had no choice but to gradually replace parts of his own body with editing equipment just to stay on top of things, which is why you never see him above a certain point, so as not to reveal the freakishly terrifying electronical man hybrid nightmare monster that he's been forced to become. At least you get lots of videos though. And this is the first lesson that we need Blizzard to learn here. Regular and substantial content updates aren't just a choice, they are a non-negotiable demand, and Battle for Azeroth's success or failure will have a lot to do with how ably Blizzard managed to fill that demand. The fact is that now, a release schedule slower or less chock full of content than it was in Legion is going to be seen as a failure on BfA's part. Blizzard need to show us that the huge array of updates we got last time out wasn't a fluke or a one-off to make up for Warlords, but a new standard that they've set themselves and that they are planning to meet. And if they do, then Battle for Azeroth will already have a massive helping hand on its way to being a great expansion. And is it a lesson that Blizzard look like learning? Well, sort of, yeah. More yes than no. Ian has said that he was really happy with Legion's release schedule, but has also said that no one from Blizzard was actually aware of the 77-day time frame on patch releases, which I flat out just don't believe, and sounds to these cynical old ears like someone getting their excuses in early. One thing is for sure, whatever happens, I don't think we'll be seeing a return to the Warlords method of less is more just yet. This is related to the content thing, but you know what really helped us feel like we were getting spoiled for excellent content in the first part of Legion? A 3-boss mini-raid out of nowhere that no one was expecting. That was brilliant, and not just because it gave us our first properly challenging raid bosses of the expansion either. Whereas no one would ever want to see a Trial of Valor instead of a full fat raid, cheekily popping one in between planned content was inspired. It's definitely something I'd like to see more of, and something Blizz claims to be open to, although not quite as open as I'd like if the complete lack of any others throughout the expansion is anything to go by. Even though much of Legion was, in my opinion, a definite triumph, there were aspects of it that split the player base quite strongly. And when one of those aspects is pretty much the main progression system that the whole expansion is built around, you're looking at another big juicy lesson to be learned. Despite my initial fears, artifact weapons ended up working brilliantly from a fantasy perspective. Carrying and leveling the same weapon around the whole expansion created a permanence and a bond with it that was really satisfying. I care about my artifact in a way that I never have with weapons in the past, where I was essentially hoping to replace them with every single loot drop that I got. So from an RPG standpoint, they worked better than I could ever have hoped. Now, the problem with artifacts came in how you leveled them. The artifact power grind is a meme now, but for good reason. In the first half of the expansion, the sheer amount of effort that it took to unlock every available trait on your weapon, a requirement for most Mythic progress and cutting edge play, was not just a total ball ache, but also incredibly restricting to players, making even one or two alts a major commitment and often effectively locking characters into one spec, which was a waste. Blizz did eventually manage to take the edge off the grind, but if the only way to fix your progression system is to make your progress less impactful or desirable, which is what artifacts became, then you haven't really fixed it, in my opinion. Overall, and mistakes aside, I like the system in principle, and clearly Blizzard did too, because Battle for Azeroth sees us put aside our weapons, say goodbye to the AP grind, and say hello to the AP grind. So the question is, will the Heart of Azeroth and this new iteration of the mechanic solve the problems that arose in Legion? Have Blizzard learned their lessons on the AP grind? And the signs are quite promising indeed. For one thing, having a single item of gear that you level up, and which applies to all of your specs, solves a major issue with artifact weapons at a stroke. No one will find themselves hopelessly behind on an off-spec beyond having to obtain some different armor pieces for it, which is pretty standard. A more interesting change, though, is that although it's your neck piece that you're leveling up with Azerite power, it's not the Heart of Azeroth itself that is becoming empowered by it. Instead, you'll be unlocking new traits on your Azerite armor pieces that will fill your head, chest, and shoulder slots. And these armor pieces will have different amounts of power needed to fully unlock their traits. So having your Heart of Azeroth at level 10 might unlock all of the traits on your blue chest, but only 2 of the traits on your purple headpiece. You might have leveled your Heart of Azeroth enough to unlock the traits on all of your Azerite armor, but then you get an awesome new helm, which means suddenly you have to go out for some more Azerite because the new traits on it require another couple of AP levels to unlock. Depending on how Blizzard approach this, and at the time of recording we don't quite know how they will, I suspect they don't quite know how they will either, this new system already has the potential to be way more interesting than, here's a new patch with some more traits added to your artifact, better make sure you've unlocked them all before the raid opens next week. There are still a lot of ifs about this system right now. Are those traits going to be interesting enough, for example? But when it comes to the AP system itself, I'm really optimistic that Blizzard are in fact on their way to learning their lessons from artifact weapons and giving us a much more satisfying and interesting progression path with the Heart of Azeroth. I'm going to call myself cautiously hopeful on this one. A common complaint about WoW in recent years, or since Wrath, is that it spends too much time catering to its most casual players and not enough time making people get good. An argument I can see both sides of, and an argument that Blizz managed to quite impressively bypass in Legion by giving us the best of both worlds. With 4 difficulty levels, raiding invited all standards of player, but those who wanted more of a challenge got it with bells on. Mythic Plus allowed those of us who like to push themselves the chance to do so indefinitely, and the Mage Tower gave players a substantial individual challenge that gets more fun the more ults you have, trust me. These 2 game modes were, in my opinion, 2 of the highest quality additions to World of Warcraft this decade, and their massive popularity has sent out a message loud and clear. We like a challenge. But has Blizzard heard this message? I'm a bit doubtful. Mythic Plus will remain WoW's esports darling, but Blizz have already confirmed that there are no plans for a Mage Tower equivalent in Battle for Azeroth, which is an actual tragedy. Instead, we'll have the new Warfronts, which, while very interesting, don't seem like they'll be very challenging particularly. And Island Expeditions, which feature the new super clever genius AI that will make it feel like you're playing against actual real-life players. Which does kind of beg the question, why not make it so you just play against other players then? Anyway, these 2 additions could be just as good as Mythic Plus and the Mage Tower, but they won't be good in the same way. For one, Island Expeditions are randomly generated and different every time, so there's never going to be that sense of, this is a challenge that I will fail at until I get it right. And it was that sort of difficulty that I found so refreshing to be offered on Legion. So fun though they probably will end up being, I feel like Blizzard haven't quite understood yet why we like Mythic Plus and Mage Tower so much. Feels like a lesson not quite learned. One of the reasons progressing through the patches in Legion felt so satisfying is because of the size and scope of the story it was telling. This was some Major League stuff going on in the Broken Isles. A full-scale invasion, the Tomb of Sargeras, Kil'jaeden, the planet Argus, the Titans. It doesn't get much bigger than that. But if the story itself touched on the epic with its grandeur, the way that story was told could be a little less consistent. On the one hand, we had the triumph that was Suramar. And yes, I know there are people that hate it, but remember, those people are wronger than the Jenna Labs product naming department. And on the other hand, we had the Broken Shore in patch 7.2. 12 weeks of so-called story so meaningless and lazy that it actually managed to drain much of the excitement out of exploring the Tomb of Sargeras, which should have been one of the most exciting things we've ever done. So why was Suramar so great, the Broken Shore so bad, and Argus so somewhere in between in terms of storytelling? Well, it's time to address a device that's become something of a buzzword over the course of Legion: time gating. Because this is what the failure of the Broken Shore is commonly attributed to among the player base. The idea that the story content leading up to the opening of the Tomb of Sargeras was locked behind a wall of not effort or gameplay, but time. The thinking goes that being given the story and progression piecemeal over the course of 12 weeks killed any excitement or tension that it may have had. It was anti-gameplay, anti-narrative, and is a singular evil that should be wiped from the face of WoW for all time. A sentiment that I completely disagree with, by the way. Because yes, if Legion had a low point, then the Broken Shore was undoubtedly it. But the story in Suramar was told in a similar way, and that was brilliant. And yes, I know some people hate it, but remember, those people are wronger than the Canadian mental health awareness sign-making team. So why did that work so well and Broken Shore fail so hard? What are the lessons here? Well, first off, Suramar had a mix of content, some of which was properly time-gated, and some of which just took a long time to do. There was between 10 to 20 hours of questing content in Suramar that was broken up by occasional rep requirements, and then in the weeks leading up to Nighthold, a handful of quests that were made available every reset to further that story. Players could choose to plow through those 10 to 20 hours as quickly as possible, or pace themselves over the course of the patch. But in either case, the story they experienced was rich, characterful, and engaging. Blizzard will argue that the Broken Shore was never meant to be like Suramar, and that's perfectly fair, but unfortunately, it managed to totally fail on its own terms too. A single new quest awaited you every week, but that quest was completely vapid and always something that you'd done loads before, like killing an elite or collecting some chests. The exact same activities that we'd already spent weeks completing on the Broken Shore because there was nothing else to do on the Broken Shore. More importantly, it was difficult to see how any of this was important to the main task at hand, getting into the Tomb of Sargeras. The lesson here is not that time gating is automatically bad, it's that there is a very right and a very wrong way of doing it, and that's what Blizzard needs to take on board going into Battle for Azeroth. Because time gating can actually be a really effective way of telling a story in an MMO and creating a sense of a place changing over time because of your actions, or of an army gathering its strength for a climactic assault. But for that to work, the content that's gated still needs to be meaningful and interesting, because when you time gate content, you're making a promise. This is worth waiting for. And if that promise is broken, then that makes any underwhelming content feel even worse. If you gate stuff, it has to be because when that content is completed, it will change something, build something, and progress something. That's why Suramar worked, why the Broken Shore failed, and why Argus worked for about 3 or 4 weeks. So, have Blizzard learned this lesson? It's hard to tell. Argus was a massive improvement over 7.2, but still didn't manage to align the content on offer to the climactic raid opening as neatly or satisfyingly as Suramar did. What is very promising though is the general increased focus on storytelling that Battle for Azeroth already seems to have. The burning of Teldrassil and the Battle of Lordaeron are pre-patch events, but are head and shoulders above the demon invasions and even the first Broken Shore scenario in terms of storytelling. Likewise, the narrative thread through each faction's leveling zones looks to be very focused indeed. And all of this is important because frankly, BfA needs to deliver its story well because it relies on it much more than Legion. In Battle for Azeroth, there's no hook of it's a massive Legion invasion, here's an Ashbringer to hang things from. BfA will live or die by how present its main story manages to be throughout all of its content. So Blizzard are taking a bit of a risk here, but it's one that could pay off brilliantly with a properly engaging, story-driven expansion. At least up until the old gods arrive and it's all like, oh man, the old gods have arrived. Okay, fine, we'll work together, but I'm still like really angry with you, okay? The whole gameplay loop of an MMO is based around working to gear and progress your character, and a great MMO like WoW gives you multiple engaging ways to do that. But Legion saw them take a little bit of a misstep here in a couple of very obvious ways. Legendaries were a really interesting idea, but ultimately failed with the player base, because in a game where you work to gear and progress your character, suddenly you had all the most powerful items in the game dropping randomly from random sources at random times. There's no doubt that there's something rather unsatisfying about that, really. Likewise with the Netherlight Crucible, something that should have made artifact relics more desirable and engaging actually managed to kill the excitement of a loot drop by having the traits they awarded not only random, but impossible to know until you left the instance and took them back to the Vindicar. The lesson here is obvious. Farming is more satisfying than RNG. And not only that, but excessive RNG actually takes away a lot of the fun of farming, so it's a double lose. And is it a lesson that Blizzard have learned? Well, yes, it looks like it, yes. Legendaries are gone, and Azerite armor have traits on them that many people think look suspiciously like the Netherlight Crucible, but which thankfully are not random at all. Every piece of gear in Battle for Azeroth which has the same name will have the exact same predetermined traits on it, no matter the eye level. So you can target the pieces you need, and you can go out there and you can get them. And because Azerite armor doesn't Titan Forge, you won't have to farm the same pieces over and over again, hoping to win the item level lottery on them. Because seriously, the item level lottery is like the worst lottery. It's a terrible, terrible lottery. And this is clearly a massive step in the right direction, and one that I wholeheartedly applaud Blizzard for making. So, you know, bravo. So what do you think, guys? Will Battle for Azeroth learn from Legion's mistakes and successes? Are there other lessons to take from this expansion I've missed out? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make these videos happen. They're like the sloth to our Goonies. Or is it the other way around? It's probably the other way around, isn't it? Anyway, if you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Mystical the Monk. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evertel. Until next time, cheerio.